a teenager, she joined the Lebanese civil war with a Christian militia of the Lebanese forces, of which she became an active member before slowly recanting and slowly rejecting the ethos of violence. All of this is recounted in her memoir, J'ai déposé les armes, une femme dans la guerre du Liban. I have dropped my weapons. Most recent publication is Benta El Fille de l'Alphabet, published this year. Régine.
Merci beaucoup. Bien, on m'avait demandé de choisir ma langue entre l'arabe, le français et l'anglais. Je choisirai le français, si vous voulez bien. C'est la langue bien. J'aurais bien voulu faire plaisir à Nawal et parler en arabe, mais bien. Je suis un peu plus à l'aise maintenant en français. Et on m'a demandé d'intervenir aussi en tant que femme, et au risque de vous décevoir, une femme dans la guerre du Liban, je vais vous dire, moi je ne me suis pas engagée dans la guerre du Liban en tant que femme. Je n'étais pas un homme, ça ma mère le savait très bien, puisque quand je suis née, elle pleurait, puisque j'étais une fille. C'était sa troisième fille. Elle en a eu 4 avant d'avoir son chef-d'œuvre. Voilà, peut-être c'est aussi l'une des dimensions, mais dans tous les cas, je ne me suis pas engagée dans la guerre du Liban en tant que femme. Je m'explique. Quand la guerre a commencé, d'ailleurs on l'appelait à cette époque les événements du Liban, on ne voulait pas voir que c'est une guerre. J'étais une fille qui a grandi dans une école chrétienne, dans un quartier chrétien, plus précisément peut-être maronite, et j'ai vécu dans un environnement complètement isolé, avec très peu de lieux de mixité. Alors, pour comprendre la guerre, il faut comprendre 2 choses. L'homme dans la guerre et les conditions dans la guerre. Alors, je me suis engagée dans la guerre en tant que membre de ma communauté. Les conditions qui m'ont poussée à m'engager sont avant tout, je le dis dans mon livre, la peur, l'insécurité, l'instabilité, le chaos. Dans ces conditions-là, on ne réfléchit pas en tant que femme ni en tant qu'homme, on réfléchit comme un être qui a perdu ses repères, ses stabilités et qui cherche une identité. Et dans cette fragilité, dans en fait, cet environnement qui est instable, dans ce chaos qui était le début de la guerre, tous les discours qui attisent nos passions identitaires étaient là pour nous reconstruire une identité basée sur cet environnement dans lequel nous avons grandi, c'est-à-dire un environnement communautaire, fermé, à l'écart des autres. Ce que je veux dire par là, c'est que quand je suis rentrée dans la guerre, je ne suis pas rentrée en tant que femme, mais en tant qu'un membre d'une communauté qui avait peur et qui avait envie, qui avait besoin de retrouver une identité dans ce chaos qui dominait. Alors cette fracture femme-homme, je ne l'aborderai pas, mais je verrai que pendant la guerre, comment aussi cette guerre désindividualise des genres. On oublie si on est des hommes ou des femmes, on n'a plus d'identité en fait. C'est plus le genre qui joue dans un cadre idéologique, mais comment je suis sortie de la guerre en tant que femme. Et ce mécanisme-là, c'est ça que j'ai envie de vous transmettre, vous témoigner, dans l'espoir que mon témoignage apporte à votre réflexion durant ce colloque quelque chose, des éléments qui peuvent nous servir à réfléchir aussi le contexte actuel, puisque tous les mécanismes de guerre se ressemblent. Quand je relis mon livre, ou je repense à ce que j'ai écrit et à mon écriture, qui était en fait aussi un acte fondateur de ma liberté de penser et de l'activisme. Là, je reviens à ce qu'a dit Evelyne ce matin, et je lis pas les études académiques à l'activisme, mais l'écriture aussi à l'activisme. Et mon écriture était dans ce sens, et mon écriture était pour réapprendre à penser ce que j'ai vécu. Et ce témoignage, moi-même, je revisite mon passé régulièrement pour comprendre ce qui se passe aujourd'hui. Et je peux vous assurer que l'expérience de notre guerre au Liban, je la vois aujourd'hui comme un laboratoire qu'on a testé chez nous au Liban avec la logique communautaire et qui a été tellement contagieuse qu'on la voit partout. Et dans mon témoignage, il y a toutes les horreurs de la guerre, mais malheureusement, avec ce qu'on voit aujourd'hui, les horreurs d'aujourd'hui, ça a dépassé de loin les horreurs que j'ai décrites dans mon livre, les prisons, les tortures, les morts et tout ce que nous avons vécu. Alors, je veux dire, aujourd'hui, on est dans une banalisation de la violence généralisée, et la crise qu'on a vécue au Liban est un modèle de ce que le monde entier est en train de vivre. Alors, l'insécurité, l'instabilité étaient les premiers facteurs qui m'ont poussé à m'engager, à chercher mon identité, à porter les armes dans le cadre d'une milice. J'avais peur. J'étais la troisième fille d'une famille qui a vécu sans violence, normalement, avec un père peut-être qui était doux, pas très courageux, et peut-être à l'époque, c'est là où je trouve que peut-être des éléments qui expliquent mon engagement en tant que femme. J'avais envie de défendre peut-être mon père qui n'avait pas la force sûrement de défendre sa famille dans des circonstances très difficiles. Après, le relais, enfin, c'est pour ça que je parle de l'homme. La guerre est tellement, est un mécanisme tellement difficile à décrypter qu'il faut vraiment rentrer individuellement dans chaque personne et comprendre où sont les failles de chaque personne et pourquoi cette personne s'est engagée. C'est pour ça ceux qui maîtrisent les conditions de la guerre maîtrisent aussi ces failles humaines. Je reviendrai à la fin avec ce qui se passe aujourd'hui dans notre monde actuel avec le numérique et peut-être une autre forme d'impérialisme. Bien, alors cet état ordre, désordre, stabilité, instabilité m'ont poussé et manque d'état surtout m'ont poussé à prendre les armes, à m'engager dans une milice. Et puis petit à petit, comme je vous ai dit, je suis rentrée dans cette logique de violence. Je commençais à justifier cette violence puisque, comme dit René Girard, dans la violence est fusionnelle. Dans un contexte de violence, tout le monde devient des clones. On se ressemble, c'est le mimétisme. Œil pour œil, dent pour dent. Tu tues, je tue. Tu tortures, je torture. On compte les morts des deux côtés, on applaudit. On rentre dans cette spirale-là. Et le mécanisme de violence, une fois qu'on rentre là-dedans, c'est très difficile de s'en sortir. Et puis, on justifie tout ce qu'on fait par la parole aussi. Et là aussi, j'étais pas femme. Pas du tout. J'étais un cerveau idéologisé. J'étais pas du tout. Je ne vivais pas tout ça en tant que femme. J'ai rejoint les services de propagande des forces libanaises, ça s'appelait comme ça à l'époque, et je participais à la création, à la justification de cette violence, au discours qui attisait les haines, qui nous séparait de l'autre, qui faisait de l'autre un ennemi. Et c'était facile, comme je vous ai dit, comme il n'y avait pas, on a vécu dans des lieux isolés, chaque communauté avait son école, chaque communauté avait ses quartiers et les lieux de mixité n'existent pas. L'université aussi était à un moment partagé entre université chez les chrétiens et université chez les musulmans. On ne connaissait pas l'autre, alors c'était très facile de diaboliser l'autre. Alors à un moment, je participais par la parole à cette diabolisation et là, je n'étais pas du tout ni femme ni homme, j'étais un cerveau bien idéologisé qui contribuait à cette fragmentation de notre société en communautés et en tribus qui se battent entre elles. Après cette identité que j'essayais de chercher, est-ce que je suis libanaise, est-ce que je suis chrétienne, est-ce que je suis maronite, est-ce que je suis maronite de la montagne ou maronite de la banlieue, est-ce que après je suis Khattab, est-ce que je suis PNL, est-ce que je suis après l'identité se forme en creux avec une fragmentation à l'infini et c'est ça en fait ce qui se passe, c'est ce mécanisme là qu'il faut qu'on comprenne et les identités, enfin moi c'est pour ça j'ai beaucoup de mal aujourd'hui à parler d'identité. Quelle identité? Les identités, oui, sont plurielles, comme disait Amin Mahalouf. Je suis plusieurs choses. Je suis libanaise, chrétienne, maronite, aujourd'hui française aussi. Je suis femme, homme, je suis tout à la fois. Et je ne veux plus qu'on me mette dans une case. Mais à l'époque, j'étais dans une case et cette case était bien cadrée, bien limitée avec tous les discours idéologiques que j'ai absorbés au départ. Les médias, vous savez, ils ont joué un rôle très important. Aujourd'hui, les médias, le numérique, les Facebook et le reste, j'en parlerai à la fin puisque c'est quelque chose qui me tient à cœur, ont pris le relais de ces médias. Et on aime bien nous mettre dans des cases, on rentre volontairement dans ces cases puisque ces cases sont rassurantes. On sent qu'on est en sécurité dans ces cases, l'étiquette est bien mise, mais après ces cases, on voit que c'est comme des poupées gigognes, il y a des cases à l'infini aussi, et sont des facteurs de fragmentation et de guerre à l'infini. Alors je ne vous aide pas beaucoup dans votre réflexion, peut-être puisque je dis je ne suis pas rentrée en tant que femme dans la guerre. Quand j'ai participé activement à la guerre, au discours de la guerre, j'étais encore moins femme, puisque la guerre produit des clones, j'étais un clone, un cerveau cloné, et petit à petit, dans la guerre, on s'habitue aux pensées prêt-à-porter, c'est-à-dire l'absence de la pensée. La pensée, on nous la sert, on nous la donne, packagée dans des cases. Vous voyez l'image un peu, on dirait le mouton de Saint-Exupéry dans sa boîte. On nous nourrit avec des pensées, mais on perd, et aujourd'hui c'est le cas malheureusement pour les générations actuelles, on perd notre capacité à penser par nous-mêmes. On perd notre singularité, on perd, sous le prétexte de chercher son identité, on perd toute identité. En fait, voilà, je voulais parler de ça rapidement. Après, l'homme et les conditions, il faut vraiment, pour comprendre la guerre, il faut vraiment comprendre ces deux facteurs. Maintenant, pour m'en sortir de la guerre, puisque j'ai plus que 3 minutes, j'ai eu la chance de vivre une expérience extrêmement difficile qui m'a ramenée à ma conscience, en fait, qui était une sorte de lumière qui a éclairé ma conscience. À la fin de la guerre, avec les guerres interchrétiennes qui étaient très, très, très violentes, j'ai eu des amis qui étaient dans une prison. Et je les ai visités à plusieurs reprises. Et l'une, c'était à Noël en Noël 86, oui, Noël 86. J'ai visité une prison accompagnée d'un moine maronite pour voir des camarades, des frères d'armes dans cette prison-là. Et le moine qui m'accompagnait chantait, avait une très belle voix. Il s'appelle toujours d'ailleurs le moine qui chante. Et cette nuit de Noël, à ce moment-là, il y avait un homme comme ça qui était à l'écart des autres, d'ailleurs que je ne connaissais pas, je connaissais les autres puisque je les ai fréquentés pendant la guerre. Et cet homme s'est mis à chanter. Il avait chanté sa mère en Palestine. Et en fait, c'était un Palestinien qui était là dans cette prison, oublié depuis peut-être, je ne sais pas, des jours, des mois, des années, je ne sais pas, mais il a chanté sa mère et tout le monde s'est mis à pleurer. Et je me suis dit, voilà, je suis rentrée dans la guerre pour combattre les Palestiniens, et un Palestinien m'a sauvée et m'a libérée de cette guerre avec cet homme qui chantait sa mère. Peut-être c'est là où je cherchais la femme dans la guerre, dans sa mère. Merci.
Our next speaker is Adriana Qubaia. She's a doctoral candidate at the Central European University's Gender Studies Department in Hungary. In Beirut, she's exploring the mechanisms of gendering political activisms, including the interactions between politics of queer, invisibility, and sexual identity formation and negotiations. In particular, she examines the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon, as well as regimes of NGOization as two key processes that are restructuring Lebanese identity politics.
So, in researching and writing this paper, I began by asking what are some of the pervasive depictions of Syrian women refugees in mainstream Lebanese discourses and narratives. My aim was not only to outline some of those dominant narratives, but also to understand what these depictions tell us about the ways in which gendered regimes function and alter in response to the Syrian war and the ensuing refugee crisis facing Lebanon. After inspecting several various public discourses, under which I include newspaper articles, reports by NGOs working together with Syrian women refugees, and a number of public statements from Lebanese officials, I want to limit my discussions to three key salient depictions and broad observations that I will first describe and then analyze. These include, first, a narrative of threat, second, a narrative of sexualized violence, and lastly, a selectively silent narrative. All three narratives point to the persistence in gendering Syrian refugees' experience of war and displacement. So I begin with the narrative of threat. To start with, narratives about Syrian women refugees are in fact scarce in public media and discourse. Yet, a handful of times, Syrian refugee women were included in the larger gendered narrative of threat. Let me first outline what this narrative of threat includes and how it is being shaped in Lebanon. In a recent short piece that we co-authored together with my colleague Ahmed Saleh on the detention of trans women in Beirut, we observed, in line with many local Lebanese writers and activists, that since 2011, Syrian refugees are increasingly and purposefully conflated with a security threat that is facing Lebanon. This is evidenced not only by the violent reactions against refugees in response to political events, such as burning of camps in retaliation for kidnappings, etc., but also through increased securitization, surveillance, and policing measures across several of Beirut's neighborhoods, including this one that we're in today, Hamra, including Bush Hamoud, including Dikwane, and others. So we argued, and I quote, "New police campaigns and modes of surveillance aim to convince the Lebanese public that the police forces are indeed in control of general security and public order through fusing and framing social concerns as security threats. As such, they extend the definition of state-level security concerns to include the policing of social activities and moral principles. Issues such as refugee influx, unemployment, homelessness, sex work, poverty, as well as selective attitudes on proper gender and sexual behavior become reframed as part of the larger imagined security threat facing Lebanon. Intervening, then, in social and moral questions thus becomes a primary way through which security forces demonstrate the control over public affairs and order. Practically, this means that particular subjects, particular persons, and particular acts become increasingly highlighted as threats to the imagined community and to the selective moral code." End of quote. So how do women Syrian refugees fall into this narrative of threat in the available public discourse? Take, for example, some statements from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jubran Basel, who is a known critic of Syrian refugees' presence in Lebanon and who has continuously warned of an existential threat that these refugees posed. One of his statements, as early as 2013, quotes him as saying, "The movement of refugees from Syria to Lebanon is pre-planned to transform the political and demographic reality and is a new act of partition." He claimed last year that the Lebanese hospitals are documenting 80 Syrian newborns for every 40 Syrian newborns. Such statements were accompanied by media stories referring to an alleged rise in birth rates of Syrian women in refugee camps. For example, one news article caused a strong counter-reaction when its author inquired about the secret of Syrian women's high birth rates. It is worth it to mention that some international media channels also feed this perception without substantiating it. An example is another article titled "Syrian Women Refugees Birth Rate Rise," which was a TV report, and I have it listed here. But the entire report is based on a single refugee's perception that a good number of women in the camp where she is are giving birth. And this claim was, of course, not substantiated at all by any proofs or any proper statistics. So the choice of this particular number, 80 versus 40, whether it is true or false, is curious. The statement is a conscious comparison meant to further fuel fears of a demographic threat that Basil outlines before. His statement addresses Syrian women as responsible for expanding the Syrian population inside Lebanon and thus for severing the refugee crisis. This falls directly into what Muhammad Ali Nail and Bassem Sheet described as discourses of blame, in which Syrian refugees are seen as responsible for many of the economic hardships and ailments that Lebanon faces, when in fact many of these same economic issues are long-standing structural ones that have been in place before their arrival. What's more is that these discourses of Syrian births are not accompanied by comparative analysis of birth rates since 2011, or an assessment of access to birth control, or even a reference as to why women are having these children. And here it is worth it to mention that there are a few emerging studies that try to detail the role of humanitarian organizations in influencing women's decisions and choices of pregnancy, due, for example, to the division of food ratios per number of children, etc., as well as some other studies that aim to capture the number of unwanted pregnancies in the camp. It appears then that we are seeing the emergence of a gendered narrative of threat, which, while portraying Syrian men and communities as a security threat to Lebanon, also portrays Syrian women as potential agents of demographic instability. Such a narrative plays on existing fears of sectarian imbalance and pushes Syrian women discursively into the category of unwanted foreigners on the basis of their sexual reproductive activity. But also, it pushes them into being, or it conceptualizes them as active agents who are held responsible for their own refugee condition. This dynamic is not in opposition to the gendered workings of nationalism. Feminist studies and gendered theories of nationalism, including ones that critically analyze the dynamics of conflict in former Yugoslavia, for example, have continuously argued that a nation is usually depicted in the image of a woman, while the nation's women are understood to mark the nation's borders. Here I include, for example, Nagel's work, Yuval Davis's work, etc. According to these theorists of nationalism, women are seen as responsible for birthing the nation's members and its defenders. Thus, the narrative of a demographic threat echoes a fear of enlarging the Syrian nation and thus its presence inside of Lebanon, which is a fear that must be contextualized within the history of Syrian-Lebanese relations and within the context of Syrian occupation of Lebanon, something that I don't have the space to really develop here. So to summarize, what must be untangled and challenged is the gendered and sexual narrative of Syrian refugees as security threats to Lebanon. We must pay attention to the ways that discourses of blame, and especially those in which Syrian women suddenly are understood as agents in their own displacement condition, which is then used to blame them for it and, of course, for general instability. The second narrative is a narrative of sexual violence, rape, and sexual exploitation. So a second common narrative in which we hear about Syrian women in Lebanon, but also in Jordan and Turkey, is a particular narrative of sexual violence and exploitation. This includes real and highly worrisome accounts of forced early marriages in the camps, which we've already heard in the conference, as well as accounts of forced sex work, accounts of rape, both inside and outside of Syria. To be clear, and as is very well established in the literature on war and sexual exploitation, rape is used as a systematic weapon of war against women, and it is also a form of violence that is generally underreported. International news media, this time, alongside international organizations, have been reporting alarming rates of rape inside of Syria and are documenting its pervasive use as a weapon of war against women. What struck me in the news articles and reports that I had read on that tackle or address sexual violence against Syrian women are two observations. One of them is, or the first one is, that oftentimes, although newspaper articles were unreluctant to detail sexual violence and rape of Syrian women while in Syria, there was a significant shift from speaking about rape to speaking about harassment when covering stories of Syrian women refugees in Lebanon. Again, the situation is different for women fleeing war and women in displacement, so I want to be careful about making that difference clear. However, what I am pointing out is that the language used in some of those articles that speak of women's fears of sexual assault and of being sexually exploited, so it speaks of being sexually exploited, but less rarely labeling these events as rape. So there's sexual exploitation as one word, and then there's rape as another word. The consequence is, of course, a type of erasure of rape from the political map of unequal gender and patriarchal relations from this mainstream coverage. This erasure, or reframing, hides the gendered workings of power inside of Lebanon and masks the factors that are underpinning it, which include a power relationship between Lebanese citizens and Syrian refugees or non-citizens. What it also serves to deny is the long-established feminist understanding that violence, especially violence in the context of war and displacement, is a continuum for women. The second point is that the focus in media stories of rape and sexual violence is seldom a focus on the perpetrators when the report is about Lebanese men. So in other words, despite strong feminist local campaigns overall in Lebanon, which I think many of you are more familiar with than me, and which call for the naming of the perpetrators, and so here we can talk a little bit about feminist politics in Lebanon, the focus in media reports remains on victims and survivors and less on perpetrators, especially when these perpetrators are Lebanese men. As I have argued in another piece with Matthew Gagnier, media reports and fake stories of rape aim to sexually villainize Syrian men as uncontrolled rapists and cast them as true destabilizers of a moral and sexual order in Lebanon. So in this piece, we used cases such as the implementation of curfew in Bush Hamoud, which occurred after a fight broke out between a Syrian man and a Lebanese man over an alleged catcalling incident by the Syrian man of the Lebanese man's partner and led to days of unrest. So we use this case as evidence that sexual harassment and crimes of a sexual and moral type become interpreted using the Syrian versus Lebanese binary, and they matter more if the perpetrator is Syrian. As many feminists before us argued, if this was truly about sexual harassment of women in Lebanon, then the state would be implementing curfews on men and not only on Syrian men. In this sense, selective narratives, and especially when used in this particular makeup, become a tool for the perpetuation of the imagined national difference between Syrians and Lebanese. Okay. The last narrative, which I'll work on very quickly, is called the selective silences. So here, I just want to go over and say that feminist analysis pointed to the necessity of analyzing and theorizing silences in women's accounts of war. So we have, for example, Fiona Ross, who based her study of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's proceedings and women's testimonies in South Africa, or who conducted the study and said that women's silences can be recognized as language. And on the other hand, we also have Veena Das, who conceptualized silences about pains and horrors experienced in war as an act of agency. So I want to talk a little bit about these silences. So while their analysis focuses on women's narratives of their own lived experiences of violence in war, I take this particular theoretical impulse and use it to ask what are some of the silences that we're seeing in media or mainstream narratives depicting Syrian women, and what are the misstories and what do they reflect. And here I encourage you to think with me about that as well, because I, of course, don't have a full answer. So the one example that I will leave you with, since we're short on time, is, again, related to rape and reproduction. So while media reports do talk about rape of Syrian women in Syria, there's virtually no mention of the pregnancies, for example, that result from these rapes and how women are navigating them. Let me summarize. So let me just add, the final thing about the silence is that we can theorize the silence in a multiplicity of ways, citing issues of shame and honor, privacy, problems of accessing to these women. But perhaps what these silences in media point to, as many of the presenters in the conference have already noted, is the neglect of women's narratives altogether, and the momentary focus on an act of violence without seeking any understanding of what comes after it. So it is again a selective act of discourse making that prioritizes a moment of sexual violence without actually examining its after effects. So in conclusion, what I attempted to do is analyze common mainstream narratives about Syrian women refugees in Lebanon, mainly in Lebanese media and in reference to international media as well. What I demonstrated is the persistence in gendering of these narratives in ways that use topics of women's sexuality and sexual violence to build a national binary difference between Syrians and Lebanese. I also demonstrated that these narratives are selective in ways that mask current workings of patriarchal power in Lebanon. What I hope I showed is that Syrian women refugees in these narratives oscillate between symbols, either of the crisis, nation, or victimization, when appropriate for a particular national discourse, and they oscillate as well between being agents when they're being held responsible for their own refugee condition. Thank you.
She's a candidate for parliamentary elections, and she has submitted her candidacy for the presidency of Lebanon in 2014. Engaged in the long civil war as a youth, she channels the lesson learned from war into her commitment to peace through her political activities. Most recent publications, Le Sang de la Paix, in Arabic, Thaman al-Silm, raise really vital questions and present also a whole program for Lebanon. In fact, she also publishes every week a statement about some of the things that need to be done politically and on other levels in Lebanon that I challenge you and ask you to all to read if you can, because I think that it's so important for Lebanon.
Lebanon has recently witnessed dramatic setbacks in the security and political arena, including the cancellation of democratic parliamentary elections twice in a row, undermining the Lebanese state and leading to the failure to elect a president for over a year. Against this political uncertainty, the security situation has greatly deteriorated as Lebanon is compressed by the cataclysmic effects of the war in Syria and now in Iraq that have led to an unprecedented and exponential rise in local terrorism. Against this hugely unstable backdrop, I would like to talk to you about what it means to be a woman in Lebanese politics today and what it meant to be a woman during the 18-year-long civil war. The two are connected. As a woman implicated in both these situations, I often ask myself the question whether my life would have been very different in the past as a man during the years of the Lebanese Civil War, and now in the present as a political figure in Lebanon. My immediate answer to the first part of the question is yes. My life would have been very different. If I had been born a male, I would have probably fought in the war and been killed like most of my young male friends. And if I'd managed to survive those years of extreme violence, then most likely I would have been killed alongside my father and my two brothers as a way of eliminating all the male heirs to the political lineage. This was the intention behind the carnage when my two brothers, Tariq and Julian, aged 7 and 5, were gunned down on the morning of October 21st, 1990. As far as the second part of the question about my life in politics, well, if I'm already dead, then it's self-explanatory. And if I had managed to survive, then most likely I would be involved in the power structure by virtue of my legacy. The answer is there. My engagement as a man in war and politics in Lebanon would have been very different and either more deadly or more rewarding. I'm going to elaborate why this is so. But before I do, I'd like to point out that modern history as we know it has progressed in the last 1,000 years as a result of scientific, medical, and technological innovations that have impacted society and led to the overall improvement of human conditions, and contributed directly to freeing women from past bondage, except in the case of nations that have remained entrenched in extremist religious beliefs and practices. The recent rise of ISIS in the Middle East, Daesh, is a case in point. It is heralding the advent of a new dark age, especially for women. If we look at women's condition in times of war, they are the silent victims of male-driven action. Mothers, daughters, sisters, all suffer the loss of their loved ones, and the sense of powerlessness that they feel is compounded by their complete disregard. Women are invisible in war. They are collateral damage. And in any ensuing peace process, the few women who are given a platform have very little outcome in the formulation of the terms of peace. The voices are all male. As a matter of fact, the more dangerous the situation, the less likely it is that women are involved. Presently, in Lebanon, the security situation has become much more volatile, and inevitably, this escalation in the military aspect is going to be a big setback for the role of women in politics at a time when women were just beginning to break through. In 2013, 45 women announced their candidacy for the parliamentary elections, compared to 12 women in 2009. However, we need to clarify that women's participation in political life has a very particular flavor in Lebanon, and so far it has been relative to the nature of Lebanese society, where there is seemingly a tug between conformity and liberalism. A veneer of openness and modernity gives the impression that Lebanon is Europeanized. However, this is only partly true, because it's fair to say that Lebanon remains at the core a conservative society with religious values often dictating the conduct and morality of the different communities. Women's issues under the Constitution come under the rubric of family law, which is uniquely assigned to the jurisprudence of religious tribunals and at the mercy of religious interpretation. Article 7 guarantees equality of rights, obligations, and duties to all citizens, but then the Constitution delegates all personal status law matters, including marriage, divorce, inheritance, child custody, alimony, etc., to the various religious courts. By stating that Lebanon's various sects should establish their own religious courts independent of the state, this waives the authority of civil Lebanese laws that protect the rights of individuals. This makes it very hard to change the law on women's issues in a way that is uniform for all women. The structure of the family in Lebanon also plays a very important part in both society and politics in defining women's roles. This familial role has been maintained over the years as a result of the system of governance. This is not accidental, but a deliberate process which has become institutionalized through the role of the Zaim, or male leader of a family, who uses his power to cultivate clientelism by manipulating personal favors and ensuring his succession. Political familialism has been one of the major factors affecting the relationship between the state and citizens. When the state fails to provide protection and resources to its citizens, they turn inwards to their families, patriarchs, and sects. Almost all political blocs are based on family allegiances and personal loyalty to the leader, the Zaim. Political blocs have become extended families, and most followers accept that their leader's son will inherit his position. This has led to a society that is still by and large feudal and patriarchal in nature, and the mechanism of its self-perpetuation has become entrenched in the forms of transmission of power from generation to generation. We are witnessing this phenomenon in its most revealing aspects presently with the request by two traditional leaders to hold special elections to pass the mantle to their sons and heirs, despite the fact that when it was time to hold elections for everyone, these were cancelled. The anomaly of considering holding elections in two districts as exceptional favors to two Zaims is a typical example of the preferential standards and unwritten codes that govern Lebanese politics and perpetuate the patriarchal feudal system. So the question is, within this patriarchal feudal system, where do women stand in politics today? How do women start to play an effective role in government? My answer is that they stand where anyone who is an outsider to the traditional old boy network of politics in Lebanon stands, at the mercy of a Lebanese leader who will afford them the privilege of taking them on his electoral list and securing their chances at being elected. As such, it's a closed system, now more than ever after Parliament extended its mandate twice in a row, and there is no new electoral law in sight that could guarantee any fair representation. Going back to the matter of political access for both women and men in Lebanon, it's fair to say that newcomers have little chance to break through, and women even less. Why do I know this? I know this because I was given the privilege of being an insider by virtue of the fact of my birth into the system. And I admit that I would not have had anywhere near the facilities to advance in the political field were it not for my family. On a personal level, I've never encountered any disrespect or disregard as a woman. On the contrary, there is great courtesy that is always extended to me due to my grandfather and my father. My family heritage allows me to break through the gender barriers by virtue of a gentleman's agreement in the transfer of legitimacy to women through their husbands, spouses, and fathers. For this, I'm honored, certainly, but I am aware of the irony, and I am diligent not to waste this privilege on perpetuating a system that only accepts women leaders as clones for their male counterparts. Women need to be seen in their own right. Women need to be accepted for what they know, not who they are. In my opinion, however, the only way to restore equal rights to women in Lebanon is to restore true democracy first. My grandfather, Camille Chamoun, was the first president to give women the right to vote. Now we need to ensure for women the right to govern, to do what we must to bring back, we must bring back democracy to a country that has waved it aside. It's only by fighting for real democracy that we can ensure the fair representation of women. Here are some recommendations to restore democracy. Firstly, we have to protect Parliament from the abuse of self-prolongation by restoring to the President of the Republic the exceptional right to dismantle Parliament in the event the MPs should desire to extend their mandates. This prerogative was removed from the presidential powers after the Taif Accord, and we have witnessed the negative results of such an amendment in the last 2 years, where the extension has brought about complete stagnation and created the domino effect of destabilizing all the other institutions and also messed up national electoral deadlines. Secondly, we have to adopt an electoral law based on proportional representation with large districts in order to break the existing duopoly between the Zaim-driven lists and thereby shift the electoral momentum from sustaining the status quo towards healthy competition based on political parties and political programs. This will allow for newcomers with new ideas to break through and enter the otherwise closed system. Thirdly, as far as women are concerned, I am advocating the imposition of the participation of women through a transitional quota for the first mandate, and it is important in any election also to technically ensure the fair placement of women candidates on electoral ballots so that their chances at being elected are ensured. Fourthly, we have to encourage women in the military and security agencies as well as ensure their fair promotion. To conclude, I'd like to say that I have been implicated in Lebanese political life since my birth. I've lived through 18 years of war, lost my whole family as martyrs to this nation, and I consider myself a third-generation Lebanese. I feel it's high time to usher in a third republic, which would reflect the deeper concerns of this nation and would bring about a transformation through the advocacy of a different form of leadership, one that is held accountable, ensures fairness of representation, as well as operational transparency. Equally, for change to occur, there has to be a complete reversal of the role of government, and it must change from one that is self-serving to one that is based on encouraging sustainable development and being service-oriented. As such, women have a big role to play in the establishment of these new values. Women are inclusive and accommodating, women are strong and protective, and their participation in government can only bring balance to a society that has suffered for years from extreme male stereotyping and the valorization of violence as a solution to political divergence. Today, in this world of polarizing conflicts, of raging extremism, moderation is the key. understanding, listening, and hearing each other the best weapons we can deploy to counteract the widening schisms between people and creeds. I'm not saying that women are the answer, but what I'm saying is that balance is the answer. Balance between the masculine and feminine energies to create lasting equilibrium. This is by no means declaring that women are not strong and capable of military leadership. Women in governance does not imply that women are relegated to women's issues. It means that women should have equal access to making all relevant decisions, including security, the military, foreign affairs, the economy, industry, and all the sectors normally viewed as male bastions. There is an inherent paradox reflected in my title today, which was From Invisibility to Visibility. This is a paradox that women have to resolve within themselves. In politics in Lebanon today, a woman leader is still invisible. To be seen, she must act like a man. Therefore, to be visible, she must become invisible as a woman. This has to change. The visibility of a woman must be as a woman by virtue of her nature, her qualities, her acumen, her insightfulness, her personality, and her political capabilities. In the coming ages, as long as religious extremists do not succeed in castrating them, women will be the guiding lights of a new way of operating in the world, based on cooperation, not domination, on sharing, not hoarding, on giving, not taking. Finally, for women to play a significant role in Lebanon, a shift has to occur in the perception of women by both women and men. And as Albert Einstein said, the realization has to dawn that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. The consciousness that defines women's role in Lebanese politics as mothers, daughters, or wives of important men in Lebanon is no longer valid and has to change. Therefore, the work being done here in this forum today is vital to raise such awareness and to shift the prevalent consciousness that limits women and their access to leadership. And I'm truly honored and privileged to be part of this exchange, and I consider women's issues to be at the core of a creation of a fair and just society. Thank you.
So I'm going to speak today about the impact of the Syrian refugee crisis on Lebanese security perceptions across the country. I don't need to go into detail. You know that the conflict in Syria has been going on for over 4 years. Lebanon is hosting the highest number of Syrian refugees worldwide. So that's approximately 40% of the total Syrian population. So over 4 years later, it becomes paramount to assess how the Syrian refugee crisis is bringing with it a range of perceived and real insecurity perceptions. So Alert, the organization I work for, conducted a research project for 3 years with the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies that was designed to enhance understanding of the challenges facing the Lebanese security sector by using a more people-centered approach to security. And a major component of that was to look at and understand public perceptions of security and insecurity across the country. So the argument that I'm making in my paper is that in order to have a more holistic understanding of the various impacts of the Syrian refugee crisis, you need to incorporate gender dimensions of this impact. Okay, so I'm just briefly going to give some definitions of the concepts I used. Gender is usually, unfortunately, used in quite a simplistic or narrow way to equate with women. But the concept that I used is that it is actually power relations between men and women, sexual and gender minorities, but also within different groups by taking into account other identity markers, including social class, age, marital status, disability, sexuality, urban-rural dynamics as well. So gender is a spectrum of different relations of power that involve all humans. A second concept I used is also part of the research, obviously, human security, which is the protection of the vital core of all human lives in ways that enhance human freedoms and human fulfillment. So I argue that actually both concepts are quite related. It is the relational nature of gender that incorporates all the different societal markers that provides a useful framework for the analysis of intertwined forms of domination and insecurities. Okay. Also, just a word about the methodology of the data that was gathered and then that I analyzed for my paper. We in LCPS conducted a detailed assessment of security perceptions through a nationwide survey of around 2,400 people. So that was a lot of data there, and quite some interesting gendered data too. But I'm relying on the analysis of that, but also of a qualitative follow-up study that we commissioned, specifically on Lebanese security perceptions emerging from Syrian refugee presence in the country. So there were interviews conducted, some focus groups, and also a survey in selected areas. So it wasn't representative of all Lebanon, but it was kind of going more in depth into some areas. Okay, now about the analysis. So there's two broad themes where I found quite strong gendered dynamics. The first was related to morality and social cohesion, and the second was on economic and livelihood risks. Also, just to note that gendered threat perceptions interlink quite the most strongly with socioeconomic variables and geographical location. Okay, so, right. Okay, so here, what was highlighted, well, the research highlighted Lebanese citizens' fear that rising poverty among Lebanese and Syrians would result in an upsurge in crime rates and what was called immoral acts. Just to give you some kind of relational information, overall women worried more than men, so 50% of women versus 41% of men. Younger respondents were more worried than older respondents. 48% of young people, 42% of older percentages. But then in the question was asked about do you perceive that Syrian refugees have similar values, similar morals, and do you think the local culture is perceived to be negatively affected? In the Bekaa was the highest percentage of threat perception and saying, yes, there is a threat to these, to our moral values, etc. In the north, in the surveys, it was 100% compatibility. So completely no problem, no, our local culture is not negatively affected. Digging a bit deeper, so from the focus group discussions and the data that is there, there's two specific dynamics that emerged that are very gendered. So although on paper it was 100% compatibility, in reality prostitution and polygamy in early marriage emerged as issues that Lebanese were in the north were quite worried about. Both men and women mentioned, so especially prostitution. Quite a lot of opinion makers and kind of important politician men in the region there were worried about it and stressed it a lot. So although the economic dilemma is quite widely understood, so Lebanese, they know why this is happening. Well, they're poor, you know, they have no income, etc. What was striking is that respondents vehemently denied that there's a linkage to innate problems in their own communities. So they really attributed the issue fully on Syrian refugees. Polygamy in early marriage was more stressed by women. And here it was noted as a threat to social cohesion, societal values. And Lebanese respondents focused on the threats that Lebanese first wives are facing in terms of economic, social, and cultural. So they were saying there's a perceived rise in divorce rates. The Lebanese wife will not accept to have another kind of co-wife. So it was this tension there. A paradox that I noted, and I think it was mentioned before as well, that so there is this paradox, is that the increase of early marriage is perceived as a security for Syrian refugee girls and women, but it is producing the opposite dynamic in Lebanese communities where it's seen as an insecurity. Okay, regarding economic and livelihood risks, there's two things I noted. First, job security, and here there is a discrepancy that we noticed with the rest of the research we did on different topics, is that there is a phenomenon of hearsay. So the perceptions are really high, but if you ask people, has this happened to you, the rates are rather low. So 68% of women, 78% of men thought that other Lebanese will face competition for work as a result of the Syrian refugee presence in their area. But then 70% of women and 64% of men claim not to be personally affected. So there is quite a discrepancy here. We could still, claim from job security-wise that 19% of women responded to be facing competition in comparison to 25% of men. There's still a higher percentage of men that is facing threats or, and competition to their jobs. There's a correlation with other societal markers, mainly that younger respondents are more worried than older generations, and these things make sense. Unemployed respondents are more worried as well, and demographically, the most kind of the threat perceptions that were most acute were from the north, Bekaa and Nabatieh. So the security risk that I threw in there, but the potential job loss of a low-paid Lebanese worker to a Syrian worker or several Syrian workers carries with it the potential of stirring up sectarian, economic, and nationalistic tensions. And I think we've already seen this, and I think you mentioned it, but not in this way, but yeah, in the media. Also that the shift in gender roles, and I think people talk about it mostly from kind of Syrian refugee perspective, which is true that there is a shift in roles but not in norms, which is causing tensions. However, seeing the big strain on Lebanon and on the capacities and of the country, one could argue that this could be causing a rise for Lebanese families too, in terms of domestic violence or negative coping mechanisms as well amongst men and women. Finally, about service provision and public health. I found this quite interesting. It was raised only or majority in majority just by women. So as I said, that the lack of existing services is often mentioned about Syrian refugees, but then vulnerable Lebanese communities kind of tend to be sidelined. So as part of the focus groups, really, it was women who mentioned that they're facing a lot of, they're struggling really in terms of, so real and perceived threat perceptions in shortages in utilities or services, and it was mainly raised in the north and Bekaa. Sewers overspilling, scarcity of water, shortages in electricity, telecommunications, an increased demand on public services, especially hospitals and schools. And I think the fact that women raise these issues really highlights that it's women's responsibility, Lebanese women's responsibility, to take care of these things, to take their children to hospitals, to take care of schools. They're the ones who, the vulnerable, if you want, Lebanese communities that were asked in these focus groups. So you can see that this is something Syrian refugees would also struggle with. Regarding humanitarian aid, I wanted to just also raise here that one point on sexual and gender minorities is that actually in situations, in these situations, they tend to be the most vulnerable because they often fall through the cracks of humanitarian aid criteria. So kind of female or male and requiring a male head. But then again, this links to other vulnerable groups of women who are separated, divorced, or widowed as well. About men and boys, I think, again, we need to stress this because women are very vulnerable, but men and boys are also extremely vulnerable too, and I think they get just completely sidelined too, and I think that's That's not really good. The inability of men, the expectations on them to fulfill the gender norms that they cannot do really leads to a lot of insecurities. And here, in terms of the paradox I mentioned before, is that the inability of Syrian refugee men to live up to the norms is actually, I would argue, causing an increase in Lebanese insecurity perceptions too. Just to conclude then, quickly, is that an understanding of perceived and real gender dimensions of security risks facing vulnerable Lebanese communities, as well as Syrian refugees, obviously, as a result of the crisis, is of vital importance if we want to successfully address security concerns more broadly. So I think in my presentation I've raised more questions than really answered. I mean, they're very specific case studies I've shown, but I think that there is a lot of potential there, and there's a lot of literature and research being done that misses out a lot of different relational dynamics, which I think is quite a shame. Yeah, okay.